the Tanakh knows nothing about partial fulfillment. That example that I gave Yeshayahu, Josiah, is exactly totally fulfilled completely from beginning to end. Or it's types, or it's dual prophecies. All these things are things that the New Testament and Christians have had to invent in order to support their contention that the New Testament is the fulfillment of Messianic prophecy.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Apostate of Mine. And with me is Rabbi Moshe Shulman. Good to have you here back, Rabbi. How are you doing?
Okay, doing better.
Excellent. So I'm so excited to get back on this. We are picking up on a series that we started last week where we're covering a bunch of what many Christians would consider messianic prophecies fulfilled in Jesus. And we covered 3 on our last episode, where you provided a wonderful introduction to the subject. And so if you haven't seen that, folks, please go back and watch that episode. You're not going to want to miss that introduction that Rabbi Moshe Shulman provided for us. And today we're picking up on the 4th of 40 that I've gathered here, and which are going to be, and I'll list them here. The Messiah would be born from the line of David. The Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, and the Messiah would be born of a virgin. Very excited to hear your take on these, Rabbi. I know that you have an introduction for all this, and so please take it away.
Okay. Last time we had a very lengthy introduction on how to understand the Bible. And when I talk the Bible, I mean what I call the Tanakh, what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. And I would just like to mention a couple points now. I don't want to go over it again. You can look at what we had before. I think, Mark, you'll put it in your comment there about where to look for it. And I'm going to put it in my comment in my area so that you can look at what the first one is so you can see it in context. Spent about 40 plus minutes on that. So I just want to spend about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe a little bit more than that, just to those people who might be just coming in now, and so they can pick up real quick what's going on, about biblical philosophy in the Tanakh. And the Tanakh is not the New Testament. The New Testament uses the Tanakh to try and make its case. And that's very important, so that when we look at how the New Testament is using something, we have to say, well, does the Tanakh agree with their methodology? Okay. So last time I gave a good example, and if you want to listen to the full treatment of it, you can listen to first what I did last time. I think it was 2 weeks ago, whatever. In biblical prophecy is very specific and is fulfilled exactly as it's done. The primary example I gave is in the first book of Kings, chapter 13, verse 2. There's a prophet who was sent to the king of Israel who had separated from Judah and started worshiping idols. And he was told, he was given a curse and said, this is what's going to happen, and specified even the person who would do it. In English, you say Josiah. In Hebrew, it's Yeshayahu. And in the Tanakh itself, the prophecy is fulfilled completely and exactly in 2 Kings 23:16. Okay. So one of the things that's important is the Tanakh is when it does give predictions, those predictions are fulfilled completely and exactly. Okay. Now, that's what we call exegesis. That's the way Jewish commentators who try and go to the simple understanding, and anybody, even scholars who try and understand the simple context, look at things exactly as it says. Now, there's something called eisegesis where people try to read things into it. And typically that's what we find of Christian sources. Now, the problem is there's 2 types of Christian interpretations that I'm going to mention because they're going to come up. There are always questions. One is a question, something called types. Types is mentioned in the New Testament. Okay, but we never see anything a type within any kind of prophecy within the Old Testament that's fulfilled within the Old Testament. Old Testament doesn't know types. It knows that when it says a certain person is supposed to do something, that certain person is supposed to do something, and that's it. It's not a type of something. It's exactly what it is. Okay, types is something in the New Testament. So if you are going to use types as you're going to bring your prophecy based on types, you have to understand is what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to take the Old Testament plus this from the New Testament and then try and prove the New Testament's true. So your argument is circular. You are assuming something you'd have to prove in the first place. You have to prove the theory of types is biblical, meaning that it exists in the Tanakh. If not, you're doing things circular. The same thing is dual prophecies. There's no dual prophecies in the Tanakh at all. We don't see that ever. But it is something that Christians say from the New Testament. Well, in order to do that, if you can't prove in the New Testament, it's not going to be valid because you're basically your argument's circular. The New Testament says this. Oh, Old Testament. Oh, so I've just now proven the New Testament because I'm basing it on an assumption from the New Testament. That's what's known as circular logic. Okay? That's the reason why I last time I made a point, but I just want to make a point of this again because it's very important. We're going to see this concept again in Isaiah 7. We see it with other things, places like that, where concepts of either types or dual prophecies are brought up. But these are not concepts that are part of the Tanakh itself. These are some things the New Testament came up with. And quite frankly, they come up with it because they don't have any real prophecies that actually existed that were fulfilled. So they have to have a way of saying, well, either it was partially filled. The Tanakh knows nothing about partial fulfillment. That example that I gave Yeshayahu, Josiah, is exactly totally fulfilled completely from beginning to end. Or it's types, or it's dual prophecies. All these things are things that the New Testament and Christians have had to invent in order to support their contention that the New Testament is the fulfillment of Messianic prophecy. Because if you look in the Tanakh, you don't have any of these ideas. And so almost all of the things that you see in the, all these claimed prophecies essentially are just aren't there. They have no basis. We're trying to say, okay, in this case, we're talking about if Jesus fulfilled real Messianic, so let's see what prophecies really existed. Okay, are they really there? And that is essentially the main point we're trying to get to here. Are there real Messianic prophecies that Jesus fulfilled or not? And if there are not, then what's all the talk about? Okay, and as we'll see, many of these main things are there, and it's pretty well known. We're going to see some interesting things today. Okay, you have there, I can barely see it, but anyways, the Messiah would be from David. The sources for that is Jeremiah 23:5 and 33:15. I'm going to bring a couple others where that's shown at. Now, from this specifically 23:5 we'll talk about here, there's two things that we find from here. One is the Messiah is from David, and some other people use this to show that actually the Messiah is going to be God. So we're going to deal with both of those issues. The primary one, of course, is to show the Messiah is from David. Now, the truth of the matter is that is actually a fact. The Messiah is supposed to come from David. Let's just read the passage that we have here. I'm going to read it from the JPS 1917 version, which is interesting. Let's start at verse 23:3. And I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries whither I have driven them, and will bring them back to their folds, and they shall be fruitful and multiply. And I will set up shepherds over them, who shall feed them, and they shall fear no more, nor be dismayed. Neither shall any be lacking, saith the Lord. Verse 5, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous shoot, and he shall reign as king and prosper, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In his days Judah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely. And this is the name whereby he shall be called, the Lord is our righteousness. And let me just do 7 and 8. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that they shall no more say, as the Lord liveth, that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but as the Lord liveth, that brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, and from all the countries whither I have driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. It continues a little bit further, but that's fundamentally what it is. So we see here quite clearly that this is universally accepted, by the way, Christians and Jews, as being a prophecy of the end times. Okay, and it clearly talks about a righteous descendant of King David. Okay, now I'd just like to point out, remember the first ones we looked at last time were that the Messiah is from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah. Well, if it says the Messiah is from David, he's automatic from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah. So why do we need all these other ones when one prophecy tells us everything like that? is because you sometimes hear him say that the mathematical odds of a single person fulfilling all of these prophecies is so much and so much because of, but if it's four things which are included within the fifth, that doesn't increase the odds. Okay. The odds of a person X being the Messiah because he's a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and David is no more than just saying he's a descendant of David.
Mm-hmm.
The odds is the same. Okay, it doesn't change because of that. But again, this is a technique used, in making these multiple lists of prophecies, which Jesus supposedly fulfilled, in order to make people think that it's much bigger. Just ignoring the fact as to whether it actually applies to them or not, but makes it appear much bigger than what it really is. So here we see that. Let's look at 33:15, and then we'll discuss it a little bit more. And then I want to look at Ezekiel 34 and 37, which are similar, again, to what we see here. Okay, so let's look at, there's a few verses before this, which actually are similar to what was there before. But I just want to start at 14 again. I don't want to spend too much time just reading these verses. So it says in verse 14, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I perform that good word which I have spoken concerning the house of Israel and concerning the house of Judah. Now, I should make a point about this. The reason why there's a separation of the house of Israel and the house of Judah is because there had been two kingdoms, a kingdom of Judah and a kingdom of Israel. The kingdom of Israel was exiled under the Assyrians, and the kingdom of Judah would be exiled, or was exiled, Jeremiah is later, was exiled under the Babylonians. So it mentions both of them because both of them come back. We're going to see Ezekiel talks about that very much. Will I cause a shoot of righteousness? In those days, in that time, will I cause a shoot of righteousness to grow up unto David, and he shall execute justice and righteousness in the land, similar ideas before. In those days shall Judah be saved, and Jerusalem shall dwell safely. And this is the name whereby she shall be called. The Lord is our righteousness. Okay. You should notice that this is the feminine she, because it's referring to the city of Jerusalem, the name of Jerusalem, whereas in 23 it's talking about the name of the Messiah. But thus says the Lord, there shall not be cut off on David, unto David a man to sit upon the throne in the house of Israel, neither shall there be cut off unto the priests of the Levites a man before me to offer burnt offerings and to burn meal offerings to sacrifice continually. Okay, talking again about the time, a number of things are going to happen. Okay, we'll see that there'll be a Davidic king. He's going to be a judge. Very, very similar to Isaiah 11, if you're familiar with that. That'll come up again sometime. And it says there's always going to be somebody in the house of David, and there's going to be priests and Levites there. If we look back at 23, what we looked at before, what we see again is that he's going to be a king, he's going to be prosper, and it is going to be a great period of time for the Jewish people. It's a renewal. Okay. Now, quite simply, just reading this, we know this has never happened. Okay. So we know sure that the Messiah is going to be from David. That's indisputable. But the question is this descendant of David spoken here Jesus? And the answer is no. We could just look at it where it says, and Israel shall dwell safely in chapter 23, verse 6. Israel shall dwell safely. The Jewish people are not dwelling safely. They haven't dwelled safely since they went into the exile. Okay? And again, in verse 7 and 8, that the Jewish people are no longer to talk about their exodus from Egypt, but actually talking about their ingathering for the exile. That hasn't happened. Okay? The ingathering that's talked about has never happened yet. So we see that this David that's supposed to come is living in a time that hasn't occurred yet. And as I pointed out with the prophecy of Isaiah, there's no such thing as dual prophecy. That's Christian invention in order to make it look like Jesus. So Christians will say, well, we're talking about the second coming. But there's only one coming in the Tanakh. The Tanakh doesn't say the Messiah is going to come here and do this, and the Messiah is going to be there. We're going to go through some of the claims, but again, we see quite clearly the Messiah is supposed to come, the Yeshua is supposed to come, and he's going to be a king and prosper. This never happened under Jesus. Okay. 33 is also the same thing. If you look at 33 again, you will see that essentially it says the same thing. Okay. Justice in those days, Jews will be saved. Jerusalem will dwell safely. Jerusalem safely. Of course, we know it's not that way. Within the last year, rockets were fired towards Jerusalem. That clearly is not an indication of Jerusalem being in safety. And of course, we know the situation today. So we know that hasn't occurred. So even though there's supposed to be a promise of a descendant of David to be Messiah, that Messiah hasn't come because this has not been fulfilled. We don't have a temple with Levites there performing the services they're supposed to do. So we know that it hasn't happened. Now, I'd like to point out one thing that I always point out to Christians is that they have a lot of concepts, a lot of principles, like the virgin birth, for example. But it's always one verse, okay? If we talk about the Davidic king coming in a time of peace and prosperity and ingathering the Jewish people, we've just seen two passages, Jeremiah 23 and Jeremiah 33. Now, I'm going to bring two more from Ezekiel. Another one is Isaiah 11. I'm going to bring Isaiah 11 another time, but if Isaiah 11 says the same thing as here. We have 5 passages that describe the Messiah as any Jew would say. He's going to come. He's going to be the son of David. He's going to come and his coming will be in a time where there'll be peace that'll continue forever. There'll be a temple and all these things in multiple verses. These concepts, like we're talking about the virgin birth or birth in Bethlehem, which are bogus to begin with, but only appear in one place. They don't appear overall. So let's look at, I want to look at Ezekiel. We'll look at Ezekiel 34. Let's start at verse 23. And if it sounds very simple to Jeremiah, it's because it is. The same exact thing. And I will set up one shepherd over them. Now, this starts a little bit earlier, talking about how the Jewish people are going to be saved from their exile. Ezekiel was in the exile in Babylonia. And he says this, and I will set up one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them. Even my servant David, he shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd. And I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David, prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. And I will make with them a covenant of peace, and will cause evil beasts to cease out of the land, and they shall dwell safely in the wilderness and sleep in the woods. And I will make them and the places around about my hill of blessing, and I will cause a shower to come down in its season, and there will be showers of blessing. Remember last time I mentioned that invariably the blessings that we have from God, what God's promised, are always in this world. Why? Because they're verifiable. Mark, if I tell you, I'm promising you that you are going to have palaces in heaven, prove me wrong. There's no way you can, that kind of a prophecy is no way being proved right or wrong. The prophecy is in the Tanakh, even though there's a place to talk about the next world and judgment and stuff like that. But the prophecies that are given, especially Messianic, are always in this world. Why? Because that way you can verify. If what it says didn't happen, it hasn't happened. The prophecy has not been verified. Just like we talked about Josiah, Ishayuli, it's prophecy. Let's go to 27 because these are, I hope I don't bore you. These are beautiful. I love them because it's talking about the time that, if you look the way the world looks now, a time that'll come that the whole world will have peace, everybody, and there won't be any wars and stuff like that. It's just beautiful to hear it because it comes over and over again. These promises are over and over the same exact thing all the time. And the tree of the field shall yield its fruit, and the earth shall yield her produce, and they shall be safe in their land. And they shall know that I am the Lord. And when I have broken the bars of their yoke, this refers to being in exile, and have delivered them out of the hand of those that made bondmen of them. And they shall no more be the prey of the nations, neither shall the beasts of the earth devour them, but they shall dwell safely, and none shall make them afraid. And I will raise up unto them a plantation of renown, and they shall be no more consumed with hunger in the land, neither by the shame of the nations anymore. And they shall know that I am the Lord. I, the Lord their God, am with them, and that they, the house of Israel, are my people, saith the Lord, and ye, my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, are men, and I am your God, saith the Lord. Again, very similar, a little bit more explicit, a little more expansive. Same thing in Jeremiah, both 23 and 33, the same concept. It's all over the place. Another one, another favorite one. I mean, I could go on, obviously, but I'm just going to do the last one, which is Ezekiel 37, because I want the contrast. I want you to see the contrast between what the Tanakh really says about the Messiah and Messianic period and how clear it is and why Jews, according to Christians, are stubborn about it. Because we have verifiable things that God says that are open and clear. We can see it. Nobody has to say, oh, I feel it's this way. if you're living in prosperity and there's no rockets falling on Israel anymore and everybody's living in peace and nobody hates us anymore, then you know that that's been fulfilled. I don't have to say, oh, my heart, I feel the people love me. No, you see it. It's verifiable. Okay. If it's not verifiable, you can't say that a prophecy has been fulfilled. Oh, it's not a prophecy of one person or the other. Okay. Okay. So let's read in Ezekiel 37. We'll start at verse 21. Again, there's some things before that. Actually, let me read one verse before that, verse 19, because remember, it was talking about in Jeremiah between Israel and Judah. Okay. Ezekiel brings up this theme in verse 19, and that'll explain what it's talking about. It says, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim. That's the kingdom of Israel. It's called Joseph in many prophecies. And the tribe of Israel and his companions. And I will put them together. On them together with the stick of Judah and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. It's talking about Israel and Judah being brought together. We saw that in Jeremiah 33. We saw it in Jeremiah 37. That's what it's talking about. The 10 tribes that were exiled from Assyria, and that tribe, they will all come back together. Okay? 20, and the 6 whereupon there was the right is, I can't read King's English, shall be in thy hand before their eyes, and say unto them, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the nations, whither they are gone, and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. So as long as you see Jews still living in New York and other places in the world, this hasn't happened yet. Okay? And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all, and they shall no more be two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms anymore. Okay, then it says they won't worship idols anymore; they worship one God. Verse 24: and my servant David shall be king over them, and they all shall have one shepherd. Who's that one shepherd? King David, the Davidic kingship. And they shall also walk in mine ordinances and observe my statutes and do them. So they would do the statutes, not like understand what we'll talk about later, the new covenant, which says what it means in the heart. It means that everybody, all the people, the Jewish people, are going to keep every one of the laws physically, not in the heart. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob my servant, the land of Israel, which was given to Jacob, wherein your fathers dwelt. And they shall dwell therein, and they and the children forever. And David, my servant, shall be their peace forever. By the way, Mark, came up in a discussion with somebody else. Do you know where the name Jew comes from?
So Judahites?
Okay, that's right. In the first place in the book of Esther, people who came from the kingdom of Judah were called Jews. Later, the area is called Judea. In the New Testament, they're called Judeans in the New Testament. That's where it is. Because a Jew means somebody comes from Judea. Just like if you say somebody's an Irishman, he's Irish because why? He comes from Ireland. When you say somebody's a Jew, you're acknowledging that their ancestors came from Judah. That's what it says. So when he talks about here, that's what it means. The land I've given to Jacob, he's talking about the land of Israel. And because that was going to, okay, continue. 26, moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. Everlasting means like forever, if you don't know what that means. Everlasting means it's going to be forever. Not like what's happened until now. And I will establish them, multiply them. I will set my sanctuary in the midst of them. That's going to be the temple. My dwelling place also shall be over them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And the nation shall know that I am the Lord that sanctified Israel, when my sanctuary shall build in the midst of them. Over and over, we have these same things in multiple verses, clearly verifiable what's going to happen. Okay? Again, the point is, yes, the Messiah is going to be from David, but let's look at what it says. Nowhere can you read Jesus into this. Even if you're going to take it that it's correct that he was descended from David, okay? Matthew and Luke have different genealogies. We'll talk about that a little bit later just for a couple of minutes because that's no way of getting out of that, quicksand of that one. But it's quite clear that, okay, just because, but he's not the one that the prophets are talking about. Not the ones that are being talked about in Jeremiah 23, not Jeremiah 33, not in Ezekiel 14, and not 34, not in Ezekiel 37. Even though all four of these are essentially saying the same exact thing about that Davidic king that's going to come, what's going to be his time, what it's going to look like. None of these apply to Jesus. It's just simply what's there. So, yes, the truth of the matter is, yes, the Messiah will come from David. No denying that.
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm not saying that's not the case. However, he will come, but it's the Messiah that's talked about there is not Jesus. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't match up. And that's one of the things that I noticed early on, that was, hey, like there seems to be a very clear connection between the Messianic prophecies with the land of Israel and its immediate impact upon like the people
Right.
politically and in many other ways, where that's not what happens in the first century.
No.
With
In fact, one of the
it's
things, I mean, we might
the
want to talk
complete
about,
opposite.
you might want to talk about this, but essentially what it seems to have happened, and I'm just going to throw this out now. Maybe one time we'll get into it more because I do want to concentrate on Messianic prophecy first, and then we can talk about other issues about it. It seems quite clear to me. Bart Ehrman talks about it also. I didn't even know he did this, but it's quite clear. There's something very well known about when prophecy fails. Very famous book written in the 1950s by a number of psychologists who looked into a specific case where a group prophesied that a certain event would occur and it didn't occur. So they marked what happened, and after that, there have been a number of studies similar thing. What happened is in my view, it looks to be similar that he might have believed he was a Messiah. He died, and they just had to invent something afterwards, and we see what goes on from there. I mean, that's pretty clearly what is, what we do see happening.
Yeah, and then they come up with the second coming as a way to,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Again, all of
scapegoat
these theories of interpretation to be able to claim something is a prophecy are invented in order to read into something what's not there. I mean, you've seen it yourself, Christians reading verses and reading Jesus into it when it has nothing to do in the context there, all kinds of things. Okay. Now, I want to, this is clear. Prophecy, Messianic prophecies are very, very clear and very verifiable. Okay. There are enough prophecies about the Messiah that are clear and verifiable that if somebody makes a claim that somebody is Messianic, he better be able to produce at least three passages which are clearly saying what they believe. You can't get at least, say 2 or 3 places where it says that in similar ways to where we just, I showed you 4, but there's like number 5 is usually Isaiah 11 when I talk about this. Then what are you saying? You're actually trying to read something into a text that's not there. Most of the time it's very torturing text. What I wanted to do is, let's look for 1 second at the genealogy we have here. The genealogies is a problem because they start different. They are differently. So, for example, Matthew starts from Abraham and goes down. Okay, and it follows essentially the kings of Judah. Whereas if you look at Luke is essentially going back the other way, but he doesn't deal with the royal family. Now, this is a well-known issue. Okay, and many different types of explanations were given. My favorite one is I think Julius Africanus was his name. He wrote that actually Luke is talking about Levirate marriage, and that's why he gives the answer. Between all kinds of different weird ways of trying to make it. But the truth of the matter is there is really no clear answer as to why these are different. Okay, some say it's Mary's, but why is Mary's ancestry in Luke more important? And none of the language is it. It is a significant problem for Christians.
Yeah.
I don't really talk about it much because the truth of the matter is that Davidic descent is Davidic descent. If Jesus had Davidic descent, wouldn't make a difference because he didn't fulfill the Davidic prophecies that were relying upon to say that the Davidic descent, the Messiah can be from David. If you're going to say the Messiah can come from David from Jeremiah 23 or from 33 or from Ezekiel 34 or from Ezekiel 37, then he's being from David, he's got to fulfill it. There's a whole bunch of people descended from King David around today. A bunch of
my theory is that Luke starts out including Mary because he's probably thinking, well, he's conceived of the Holy Spirit. So, you know, how does Joseph really play a role in this genealogy? So somehow he's got to graft her in there somehow.
Well,
And then Matthew is maybe perhaps aware of the issue of tribal lineage in the
yeah.
Jewish
But
tradition,
that doesn't,
and
you
he
see,
like,
the problem
well,
is the tribal lineage
Mary
doesn't
is
help, because even if Matthew was correct with Joseph, unless you say that Joseph was a real physical father, it doesn't help the tribal lineage. He doesn't have the tribal lineage to that.
right.
Okay, he would essentially have no tribal lineage. For example, if somebody converts to Judaism, they don't have any tribe that they belong to. They have no tribal lineage. Okay,
Yeah.
if somebody was, a Jewish woman had a Gentile father, for example, which we consider, with the person that is considered Jewish, has no tribal lineage. Okay, the tribal lineage is always from the father. So, for example, I'm a Levite because my descendant from father to son is to Levi ben Yaakov. It's always that way. Okay, the the line of the kings in Judah were always through David, the physical son from one to another. There's no way of getting around that. So the genealogies, besides being mixed up, it doesn't really help very much. And there's some things about the genealogy which funny. I think Matthew's genealogies with the 14 generations is somewhat interesting. Um,
Mhm.
I have my own take on it, which is a little bit complicated and based on the type of Greek learning you find in Philo and how Philo would look at numbers and how the numbers have significance and stuff like that. Something that would be lost to us today, but somebody living at that time who would be familiar with, Middle Platonism and the significance of numbers would look and see that as being really significant. But
Yeah.
the bottom line, as far as that's concerned, even if it were the case that Jesus was descended from David, okay, and let's say Joseph was really he was a physical son of Joseph and Mary, descended from David, okay, he still did not fulfill the prophecy. Yes, there's a prophecy for descendant of David, but there are a bunch of descendants of David. The royal line of David was still going on in Babylonia and actually were like rulers of the Jewish people in Babylonia until the 11th century. Okay.
And I'd say that having the result of the political impact, we could just talk about that in itself, because Jesus never ruled anything, he never became king of
Right.
anything. So to me, the aspect of being of the lineage of David is because of that. So to disassociate actual rulership from the being linked to David seems rather kind of
Well, again, the point
inappropriate.
is, listen, we're dealing history in a period of time. There's virtually nothing written about Jesus contemporarily. Okay. All the things that were written about were based on stories people wrote down and stuff like that. So we don't really have any contemporaneous stuff like that. There's almost nothing that we have from there. There's two disputed things in Josephus. One I think is totally bogus. I actually wrote an article on my website, judaismsanswer.com, about Josephus and Jesus, where I explain why it is that I think that it's so totally unreliable that we can't consider it as being any kind of evidence whatsoever. There's another verse, it's not a verse, but another sentence which mentions somebody could possibly be Jesus, but doesn't really tell us anything anyways. We
And we'll
just
be
do
sure to include the link on the subscription in the notes
Yeah,
of
okay.
the
I will put a link to my website. It's called Josephus and Jesus, and it's judaismsanswer.com. You'll see it there. That's some advanced Jewish apologetics there, which is what my site is based on.
Yeah, and
But
just to clarify, that is not just a rabbinic position. Like, I think that's a consensus among historians, that passage, the famous passage on Josephus, is actually an interpolation, or a text that was added later.
among those that are there, they say that there's a core that was from Josephus, and parts of it were added from Christians later on. Okay. As to what that is, there's all kinds of disagreement. F.F. Bruce has. F.F. Bruce is a very famous evangelical scholar, and other scholar Bart Ehrman also holds certain amounts of things are there. Okay. Okay. Let me do one more thing about this David, the verse Jeremiah 23. because besides using this as a source, the Messiah being from David, Jeremiah 23:6 is used because they're trying to say in the KJV version, I'll read from the KJV right now. It says, in his days, Judah shall be saved and Israel shall dwell safely. This is his name, whereby he shall be called, the Lord our righteousness. Now, in the KJV, by the way, this is a very good example of their creative translation and distortion of what the underlying text is. The Lord our righteousness is all in capital letters. Look in the KJV, I'm taking from my KJV in front of me. It's all in capital letters, indicating it's like one name, whatever, some kind of thing. And that's used by many people, many Christians, to argue that it's saying that Jesus is God. Now, in the Hebrew, as anybody who knows, there's no uppercase and lowercase. It's all the same thing. Okay? What's interesting is if you look at this in the Hebrew, and let me bring that up here a second here. Okay. In the Hebrew, the name is Yud Hai Vav Hai, Hashem. We say Hashem Hashem, Tzidkenu. Okay. And if you look in Jeremiah 33, you find the same exact thing in verse 33:16. The words are exactly the same. But if you look at the KJV, the Lord is all in capital letters because that is his translational custom. In order to let you know when it's saying Lord, when we're referring to the four-letter name of God, he spells the word Lord with all capital letters. So you know that that's what it's talking about. So it's a very valid way of translating, okay? But the words our righteousness are all in lower letters in Isaiah, in Jeremiah 30. But it's the same words, the same exact words. The only difference is in Jeremiah 23, it says he shall be called because it's referring to the Messiah. And in Jeremiah 33, it says she shall be called, it's called a city. Well, if referring to something as the Lord our righteousness means that which is referred to is an incarnation of God, then Jeremiah 33:16 is telling us that when the Messiah comes, God will be incarnate in the city of Jerusalem. Same exact words. If you're saying that the name implies what the thing is, it's ontology, then it means that the city of God is being incarnated in the city of Jerusalem, just like it's being incarnated in the Messiah. It's the exact same words. The only thing is a pronoun, she referring to Jerusalem and he referring to the Messiah. There's no difference. It doesn't mean anything. First of all, it's not what it means, because when I talk about Isaiah 9, which is the primary place we're talking about, they try to use a name to call about the deity of the Messiah, but names do not mean what a person is. I'm going to give you a whole list. It's going to take 10, 15, 20 minutes just on all these places so you can see how names, and I don't want to, this is not the primary part here, but I just want you to be aware that this is creative translation being done to prove a doctrine. Mm-hmm. Okay? There is no greater type of falsification and dishonesty than doing that. It's one of the reasons why I say that whenever you want to get into exegesis, if you don't know the underlying language, like Hebrew, if you don't know it, you shouldn't be involved, because you're just, these guys are going to fool you. We're going to come up with another one later on, by the way, on Micah. Yeah. There's another instance where the KJV mistranslates just in that passage to bring out a doctrine.
Right.
Okay. So the point of the matter is, Jeremiah 23:6 does not say that the Messiah is going to be an incarnate of God, just like in Jeremiah 30 is not saying the city of Jerusalem is going to be God incarnate. Okay. Just because the name is associated, that's just something that is customary we find throughout the Tanakh. Okay. And again, when we do Isaiah 9, I'm going to do a bunch of them, and I'll remind you of this when I do that. Okay. Because it's one of the examples. There's many, many examples. naming conventions in the Tanakh do not tell you ontologically about, ontology means being. Those who don't know, it doesn't tell you what the thing is. Okay, it doesn't tell you it's a being, but it is symbolic of something that's going to happen, something that's going on. We're going to give a whole bunch of examples that just see how naming conventions actually work in the Tanakh. Even my name Moshe in the Tanakh, in the Torah, it's the name actually has a meaning to it. Okay, which has nothing to do with Moshe, himself. It has anybody named Moshe doesn't refer to him. So I just want to bring this up because this is sometimes brought in here. It doesn't have to do with the Messiah being from David, but it is one of the verses that brought to the Messiah is a deity, and that's just absolutely false. It's based on translational liberties taken to basically translate in a way to prove your doctrine. This is even worse because the KJV actually capitalizes the whole thing to try and bring it out when it's no different than what's here. Why doesn't it do the same thing in both places? Because in one place he has a doctrine he wants to propose, and the other place he doesn't have that doctrine.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I had to say with regards to this particular issue. The next one we're going to talk about is Micah 5.
They claim the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem.
Correct. Okay. Now, this is actually in Matthew 2, 5 through 6. So this is a very important thing to recognize, that it's not just that some Christians came across this idea and tried to push it. We know that it's something that, in fact, was, the New Testament proposes it.
Decided.
Now, right. So let's first look at the verse itself. Let me bring it up in front of myself while we're talking. I'm going to read it first as it appears in the translation that I use most, which is the JPS version from 1917. So let's read the verses. I'm going to read the first. In the Jewish, it starts actually in verse 1. The Christians, it ends up being verse 2, but okay, that's dummy. Okay, but thou, Bethlehem Ephrathah, which are little to be among the thousands of Judah, out of these shall one come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from old, from ancient days. Therefore will he give them up until the time that she who travaileth hath brought forth. And the residue of his brethren shall return with the children of Israel. And he shall stand and shall feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall abide, for then shall he be great unto the ends of the earth. And this shall be peace when the Assyrian shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our palaces. Then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 princes among the men, and they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod with the keen-edged sword. And he shall deliver us out of the Assyrian when he cometh into our land, and when he treadeth within our border. And it says that then the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many peoples, and it talks about that. Okay, so this is clearly, by the way, we have to clarify here one thing for sure. This is clearly messianic in that it is talking clearly about what's going to happen when the Messiah comes. Okay, so it is about the Messiah. That's not what the question is here. The question is talking about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. Now, let's look at what the KJV says about this. Okay. Let's read 5:2 there. But thou, Bethlehem, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, out of thee shall he come forth unto me to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. Okay. And essentially, it talks about the same thing. So they're similar. The only difference between the two is it says in the JPS from days of old, and in KJV it said from everlasting. That is used by some as a proof that the Messiah is supposed to be deity because he's eternal. Okay, we'll discuss about that at the end. Let's deal with the first issue about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. Okay, there is a number of problems. First, we have to go back to what actually does the verse say. Okay, If we look at the KJV doesn't say that the Messiah, that he's going to be born there. He says he shall come out of. Now, the Hebrew word used there, mimcha li yaitzai, from you will come out to me. Yaitzai, the word yaitzai means to come out. So the question we have to ask is, does the word yaitzai, come out, mean to give birth, to be born? And the answer is no. Okay. If we look at, there's a number of good examples. The yaitzai, go out, means essentially what you would expect. When you say you go out of X, whatever X is, the person is going out was in X and is going out of X. So let's look at Genesis 28:10. In Genesis 28:10, the verse says this: and Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. The verse says, the Yaitzai Yaakov Beersheba. The Yaitzai, the same word, the Yaitzai, and he went out. Jacob went out from Beersheba. So it means he went out from a city. When you use Yaitzai with a city, it means somebody traveled out. Mm-hmm. Okay? He had been in the city of Beersheba, and he went out of there. It's very simple. Now, in truth, sometimes we do use it to describe the act of birth. So if you look in Genesis 25:25, we see it says this, referring to how Esau was born, and the first came forth ruddy, all over like a hairy mantle, and they called his name Esau. It says, V'yaitzai Horishan, the first one came out, saying, trying not to be too graphic here, but saying that the Esau came out of his mother's womb. He came out, okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, doesn't say he was born. It means he came out, describing physically exactly the action of going out. Okay, right. It does not mean to be born. There's in fact a word that means to be born, which is used all over the place. The word is Yaled, and if we take a look, let's look at one of the many, many, many examples we could use. Genesis 4, verse 1. Where we see, and the man knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. Bore means to give birth. There the word is v'taha, and she became pregnant. V'teled, and she gave birth. Okay? The word yaled, or teled, which is the future tense, just means to give birth. Okay? Yaitzai does not mean to give birth. So the verse doesn't mean that. So here we have an interesting problem now. If we look at Matthew 2:5-6, it says quite clearly, and they said unto him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, and thou Bethlehem, the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people. Okay, governor, it's fine. Translation's fine. I'm not worried about that so much. Mm-hmm. But the question is, that's used to say that he was born there. But that's not what it says. I've been to Bethlehem. I've come out of Bethlehem. Coming out of Bethlehem just means that they came out of Bethlehem. Mm-hmm. And in fact, not only does the verse not say that he was born there, it came out. It could have been saying that, the Messiah is going to be living there. That's what's saying. We actually have no historical evidence that anybody ever believed such a thing. For example, Josephus brings a number of people who claim to be the Messiah. Not a single one of them claimed anything from Bethlehem. 100 years later, during the revolt against Hadrian, Bar Kokhba was declared king and was thought possible to have been the Messiah. Nothing about being born in Bethlehem. In Jewish history, there have been many people who've claimed to be the Messiah. There's a famous one that the Maimonides wrote a work called the Letter to Yemen. The person lived in Yemen and he claimed to be the Messiah. When the Rambam, Maimonides, was writing to say that he can't be the Messiah for various reasons, he doesn't ever say because he never was born in Bethlehem or ever visited the city. Mm-hmm. Never. So what is the meaning of this? Well, we all know that David was born in Bethlehem. He left later on to live in Jerusalem, which from the time he lived in Jerusalem, the name of Jerusalem was also called Ir David, the city of David, which is Jerusalem. That's, by the way, a mistake in Luke. We could talk about that mistake sometime. Luke says that they had to go to Bethlehem because it was a city of David, their ancestor. It wasn't David's city. It wasn't the city of the royal family of David. During all the period of the kingdom of Judah, once David settled in Jerusalem, it never was. David was born in Bethlehem, but that wasn't the city of David. And if you go to Israel, you will find a place there. You'll see a sign that says Ir David. It's a place by the old city. It's called the city of David. Go there, you'll see it. It's called Ir David, the city of David, because the city of David is Jerusalem. So Luke got it wrong.
And that's where his palace was and everything, right?
Yeah, the city, it became called the city of David because David built it, essentially. He built up the city of Jerusalem and became the capital of Judah. And he was the one built it. And it was called afterward the city of David. When the Tanakh refers to the city of David, it always 100% of the time refers to Jerusalem. Luke got it wrong. Okay.
In Bethlehem, is that the house of bread or something like that?
Yeah, that's what it means. I don't know the source of the name, but it was called Bethlehem. It's not far from Jerusalem. It's like a drive about 15, 20 minutes. The tomb of Rachel is there. I've been there a number of times, so it's not very far from it. But it's not the city of David. The city of David is Jerusalem. Bethlehem is away from there. If you were to travel there, by feet, it would take you a number of hours to get there. Okay, so it's not far, but it's not near by car. It's not, depending on traffic. It depends on how hard it's getting. But again, the city of David is Jerusalem. That's it. But David was born there. So when it says that from that city somebody came out, it's referring to the fact that David came out of the city. That's where the rulership. The house of David has its source in the city of Jerusalem. We have something similar to that. In Isaiah 11, it refers to the Messianic king, the descendant of David, as Shorish Yishai, a root coming from Jesse. Jesse was a Bethlehemite. Okay, he lived in Bethlehem. Okay, that's why David was born in Bethlehem, because his father was a Bethlehemite, and Bethlehem was in the area of the tribe of Judah. So he was a Bethlehemite, and so David came out of that area. That was where he came. He was born in Bethlehem, and he came out of there, just like very similar to what it says there in Genesis 28 about Jacob coming out of Beersheba. David came out of Bethlehem. That's all it's referring to. It is messianic, but that's all it's really referring to. Now, again, if we read some of the things that it says in Micah, 5, especially look at verse, what's supposed to be going on there. So, for example, it says in verse 3, in the majesty of the name of the Lord, and they shall abide, for thou shalt he be great unto the ends of the earth. No, even until today, Jesus is not great to the ends of the earth. There's lots of places that don't, know him or acknowledge him. And certainly in his lifetime, that never happened. As we pointed out again in Tanakh, you get one chance and it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And that's all there is to it. So Micah 5:4 sort of excludes it even referring to Jesus having fulfilled it. Although the Messiah will, of course, come from David, who, as we've seen beforehand, is the son of David. And David came out of Bethlehem. That's the simple meaning of what it says there, telling us in Micah 5:4 that the eventual Messianic king, he is somebody who came out of Bethlehem, meaning he was King David, David's descendant. Now, let's talk about this creative translations here that we have from the KJV.
And just for my audience, we have an episode also where we talk about the trouble that Matthew has to go through to place Jesus in Bethlehem,
Right.
while maintaining his reputation of being one known to be from Nazareth.
There's all kinds
and how they differ with Luke.
Luke is the worst egregious thing, because the census is just totally bizarre, because we don't know of any census at that time. We don't know any census at the time that had the kind of thing where somebody would have to go back to where his ancestor of almost 1,000 years ago lived. Not 1,000, 500, 600, 700 years ago, where King David. We know of no kind of census where you had to. Yeah, there were censuses in Egypt, for example. We had to go. Let's say if I was in Chicago, okay, and there was a census, they would say, okay, you have to go back to New York to fill out your census papers. You can't do it in Chicago. You have to go back to, that was not unusual. Okay, you would have to do it. So in Egypt, you had to go. Okay, that kind of a census, we know a few examples of, but never a census that you had to go back to an ancestor from many, many, many years ago. Okay, such a thing is totally unknown. But Luke mentions that he had to go to Bethlehem because it was the city of David, which of course is false, and the whole concept is just bizarre. How it actually comes about, I have no idea. That it's not true is one thing, but how it comes back is anybody's guess. So let's look. I want to look at again the translational difference in what in the Hebrew is 5:1 and what is in the KJV in 5:2. Now, at the end of 5:2, this is what the KJV sends again. Okay? Out of thee shall come forth unto me to be a ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. Okay? Mm-hmm. The word everlasting is, I want you to remember that. That's how the KJV translates the words I'm going to give you in Hebrew in 1 second, everlasting, in Micah 5:2. Okay? Now, in the JPS, okay, they translate the words as from ancient days. Now, the word in Hebrew is mimai olam. Mimai olam. Okay? Mm-hmm. Just want you to know, mimai olam. Mm-hmm. Now, the KJV, in the whole Tanakh, that expression, mimai olam, appears 5 times. One is here. So what I did is, I know what the Hebrew means. It means from ancient days. It means, but long time ago. So like, George Washington was president Mimai Olam in ancient times. Okay, he had been beforehand the president of the United States. So 200 years, I guess, is enough to call ancient previous times. Okay, appears 5 times in the Tanakh. This very expression 5 times. Okay, I just want to look at how the KJV translates it. Okay, 5 times. First one we're going to look at is Isaiah 63:11. Okay, 63:11. Here's what he said. Then he remembered the days of old, Yomei Olam, Moses and his people. Okay, now it talks about them rebelling, and they remembered Moses and his people.
Yeah, and it's the same phrase in the Hebrew.
Not the exact same word. Okay, Amos 9:11, and talking about it's a beautiful thing. In that day, I will raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen. It's talking about the Messianic period, by the way, and close up the breaches thereof, and I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old. Mm-hmm. This is talking about rebuilding it as it was in the time of when David first built it up. The days of old at that time he's talking about. Yomei Olam, the days of old.
Yeah. Doesn't
mean eternity, the days of old.
It has a different prefix, but that's because it's describing it as in the days of old.
Prefixes in Hebrew are basically prepositional phrases usually. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's go to the next one. Malachi 3:4. Malachi 3:4. Here's what he says there. Then shall the offering, talking about the Messianic period again, okay? Then shall the offering of Judah and Jerusalem be pleasant unto the Lord as in the days of old, as in former years. Again, Yomei Olam. What's it talking about? It's talking about that the temple will be rebuilt and it will be just as it was in the old days when the temple had existed in the first place. Talking about historical period of time. It's not talking about eternity, historical period of time. Okay? The final one is Micah 7:14. Micah himself uses the same expression in another place. And what he says, Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead, as in the days of old. Excuse me. Again, Yomei Olam. As in the days of old. The KJV has no problem translating it correctly when he has no theological bone to pick. Okay, but when he has a theological bone to pick, the KJV has no problem changing the meaning of the words. Basically, no respect for the biblical text itself, changing it in order to its theology. Now, I'm not given to exaggeration, but I think the two examples we've shown today with the Lord our righteousness and this shows that the KJV is unreliable unless you can look into the Hebrew text itself and see what he's translating. When it gives, especially with the idea of the deity of the Messiah, you have to be very careful and look at what the Hebrew says because he's falsified. He's falsified a number of times. Okay?
Okay. So for our last one for today, this one is one of those so-called Messianic prophecy. And I think you and I both agree on this one. This is definitely not a Messianic prophecy, but we're going to cover it because it's so common. And that would be the Messiah would be born of a virgin, quoting Isaiah 7:14.
Yeah, 7:14 is not just a supposed Messianic prophecy, which we're going to get into and show why it's not, but it's a significant one because the virgin birth, which it claims to prophesize, is significant in both the book of Matthew and the book of Luke. So it's a doctrine. Now, remember what I said earlier before is when you have something like this, a doctrine, just like we showed with the prophecies in Jeremiah 23:33 and Ezekiel 34:37, where we see the Messianic, the picture of the Messiah and the Messianic period very clearly described and easily verifiable. The question always has to be when a Christian is going to say, hey, this is a prophecy of such and such a doctrine. The question is, well, how many times does this doctrine appear in clear form, just as we have 23:33, Isaiah 30, Ezekiel 34 and 37? How many appearances of this do you have there? And you'll find that they'll basically, the mouths will be open, but you never get, or you get a verse which you really have to do some kind of gymnastics to make it, seem to mean what it says. So I want to hammer that home very much because I want to give a contrast between what the Tanakh actually says in prophecy in the Tanakh and what the Christians have to invent or read back into or distort back into the text. Okay? These prophecies are not proofs. What they are is basically self-affirmations of what the New Testament's claiming to begin with, which has no proof for it. So, with that said, let's deal with Isaiah 7:14. Now, we will get to the verse 7:14, by the way, eventually. But before we do that, we have to know what's going on here. There's a context, okay? Something's going on here. So let's go into that context right now, okay? The context of it is, obviously, we can start at the beginning of chapter 7 and see what it tells us. I'm going to read from 7:1 through 9. I want to give you, because 7:1 through 9 is giving us a background to understanding what's going to go on. And basically, it's a background for chapter 7 and chapter 8. I will argue when I talk about Isaiah 9, that's chapter 9, and also chapter 10. Okay? So we'll just concentrate on 7, 8 today, and we'll get to Isaiah 9, which is going to be the next one I'm going to do. We're going to do a little bit more about some of the other chapters here. So let's read what it says here. Chapter 7, verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Achaz, the son of Jotham. Now, what's very important to understand in the book of Isaiah, if you do not know it, numerous times it'll stop and say, this happened in a certain time like this, because that's the beginning of another prophecy that Isaiah is giving. In a sense, when I talk about the book of Isaiah, it's very hard for me to talk about the book of Isaiah as one book, It's actually a collection of various different prophecies from various different times, usually, but not always, starting off with an introduction. So Isaiah 1 starts off with an introduction. These are things Isaiah says, certain people go and through chapter 6. Okay. Chapter 7 starts again setting the scene, as it were, for what's going on. Okay. So 7:1. And it came to pass in the days of Achaz, the son of Josim, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Ritzin, the king of Aram, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. Okay, so first we're going to go very clearly, it's important. It has to be understood, by the way, that many Christians don't, that much of the material here is historical. These are real events, real people that these things are occurring to. Many Christians, because the New Testament seems very, as I said, there's only one person in the New Testament who has descendants alive today that we can point to. Whereas in the Tanakh, there's a whole Jewish people who have ancestors who are in the Tanakh. You can point to, hey, this is, I'm a Levite, so Levi ben Yaakov is my descendant, my ancestor. Okay, so you can point to some, hey, that's an ancestor of mine. Okay, there's more, but I'm just trying. The point here is that so there's a real events going on. Okay, these events are actually historic. We know we found actually documentation about these wars. So this is not something that didn't happen. So there's a real history back here of what's going on. So here we see that Aram and Israel made a pact with each other to attack Judah, because it was the kings of Israel very many times tried to do that. Not always, but tried. Okay, 2. And it was told the house of David, saying, Aram is in confederation with Ephraim. Ephraim is a alternate name for Israel, the northern king of Israel, and his heart was moved, and the heart of his people as the trees of the forest are moved with the wind. Meaning, they were basically shivering in the boots, I think is the expression. They were shivering in the boots because they were being subject to invasion by two kingdoms that together were stronger than they were. 3. Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, go forth and bring now to meet Achaz, thou and Shir Yashiv, thy son. Shir Yashiv, the translation of Shir Yashiv, you should know, means a remnant shall remain. That's important because, as we mentioned a little bit of conventions about naming, and we're going to talk about this more, Isaiah 9, Isaiah was told to name his children with names which were symbolic. Okay, so Shir Yashiv was told to be a name because Isaiah was going to prophesy about how the Jewish people were going to go into exile and what's going to happen. And Shir Yashiv was to say, don't worry about it. A remnant is going to remain. So his name was symbolic. Again, this is very, very common in Tanakh. You have to understand it. And it's very important because Christians misunderstand it and distort it. Isaiah 9 is going to be a good example of it. So again, I'm just mentioning, throwing it out here, Isaiah 9, I'm going to spend much more time on it. I don't want to spend a lot of time here. It's the real place to spend the time on naming conventions is Isaiah 9. So again, to continue with that, Shir Yashiv's son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field, that's apparently the place where he spoke, and say unto him, keep calm, that was going to be Achaz, keep calm and be quiet, fear not, neither let thy heart be faint, because of these two tales of smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Retzin and Aram and the son of Remaliah. Because Aram has counseled evil against thee, Ephraim also, and the son of Remaliah, saying, let us go up against Judah and vex it. Let us make a breach there and for us, and set up a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabah. Thus saith the Lord. So what were they planning on doing? Very important for understanding the story and the context of what's going on here. It was not just they were going to invade it. They were basically to make it somewhat of a vassal, extinguish the kingdom of David, and set up somebody else from another house in its place. Now, if you are familiar with the biblical story, you know that, in fact, in the northern kingdom, that's what happened. Okay? Yeroboam had the kingdom. He was killed by Omri, I think. And then another kingdom. We'll see that that Achav was killed and another kingdom took its place. These were constantly happening in the northern kingdom. Whereas in Judah, the kingship was always being with the descendants of David, because that was Hashem's promise. The promise that it would be the kingdom would be for David. But here, what's happening? The king of Israel and the king of Aram were getting together. What did they want to do? They wanted to end the house of David completely. Depose the king, put somebody in his place, and basically end the house of Israel, of David. Okay,
was this before the Assyrian captivity?
Yes. Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel went into Assyrian captivity not very much longer after this. Maybe 100 years, I think it was after that. I don't have in front of me the chronology of it, but it wasn't very much longer after that. Okay, but importantly enough to remember is this: what are we talking about here? We're not talking about border wars and stuff like that. We're talking about a war of conquest and to depose the king there and set somebody else up in his place. Okay, so what do we see here? Thus said the Lord God, it shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Etzin. And within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it be not a people. So 65 is 65 years later is when Assyria took it over. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Amaliah's son. And if you will not have faith, surely you shall not be established. Okay, so what do we see here? Very simple. Isaiah is setting the context for what's going to happen, the prophecy is going to give. What is it? We see these kingdoms, Israel and Aram, in concert together to destroy the kingship of the house of Judah, the house of David, and place somebody else on the throne. Now, we see this discussed in other places also, so I'm going to bring the other places in the Tanakh where we see it. One is 2 Kings 16, and the other is 2 Chronicles 28. I'm going to do the JPS, but the KJV has essentially the same thing. So we see in chapter 16, in the 17th year of Pekach ben Remaliah, okay, he's the king of Israel. Achaz, the son of Yotam ben king of Judah, began to reign. Okay, that's when he became king. 20 years old was Achaz when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. Okay, he was like his God, like his David, his father. Okay, very important. You should know that the kings in Judah, basically they flipped. You'd have a bad king and a good king, a bad king and a good king. Basically, was one after the other. One was a very righteous king. The next king wasn't so good. So, like for example, the king after Achaz is Hezekiah, Hezkiah. He's a righteous king. His son Manasseh was a wicked king. Manasseh's son Yeshayahu, Josiah, is a righteous. So you get back and forth. Okay.
Yeah, we see that trend for sure.
Yeah, we see that trend there. Okay. There were many righteous kings, but there were also many who weren't so good. Okay, so then it talks about the next paragraph, how the bad things he did. Verse 5, then Itzin, the king of Aram, and Pekach ben Remaliah, king of Israel, came up against Jerusalem to war, and they besieged Achaz, but could not overcome him. At that time, Itzin, king of Aram, recovered Eliath to Aram and drove the Jews out of. Jews here means as the people of Judah. From Eliath, and the Edomites came to Eliath and dwelt there unto this day. Okay, then it talks about how he sends to Assyria to help him, and that's what happens. The next passage we're going to look at in Book of Chronicles. Again, Chronicles is pretty much the same thing. I will point out something that I don't know how many of listeners will know about. There are two books, the Book of Kings and the Book of Chronicles. The Book of Kings deals with the kings of both Israel and Judah. Okay. However, the Book of Chronicles is all about the kingdom of Judah. That's its primary emphasis. So while the history of Chronicles starts from the very beginning and goes through a lot of stuff that's not there, primarily its purpose is to follow the kingdom of Judah until it ends. Whereas the Book of Kings is following after the Book of Samuel, continuing the history, but deals with both the northern and the southern kingdom. I don't know if people are aware of that, but this is real history. This is some people forget when they read the Bible, they memorize it and they forget this is real history. Chronicles is different because Chronicles has a different purpose. Chronicles' purpose is talking about the kingdom of Judah and not about the kingdom of Israel. That's why there's some very, very wonderful stories in the book of Kings, like the story with Elijah the prophet. But because he was in Israel, he wasn't in Judah, we don't see that in Chronicles. Okay, so chapter 28 again is pretty much the same thing. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and he did not that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, like David his father. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel in the northern kingdom, and made also molten images of the Baalim. Moreover, he offered in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and burned his children in the fire, etc., etc. Okay, so we see what's happened. Verse 5, wherefore the Lord his God delivered him into the hand of the king of Aram, and they smote him and carried away of his a great multitude of captives. Okay, part of the kingdom was, but not Jerusalem, and brought them to Damascus. And he was also delivered into the hand of the king of Israel, who smote him with great slaughter for Pekah and Remaliah slew in Judah 120,000 in one day, all of them valiant men, because they had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. Notice how this is talking more about Judah, so it goes into more detail about what actually happened. But essentially, it's the same thing that we see on Isaiah. The two kings, Aram and Israel, were attacking Jerusalem, their goal being to overthrow the kingdom of David. And Zichri, the mighty men of Ephraim, slew Maasai, the king's son, and Zecham, the ruler of the house, and Achan, the next king. Okay, and the children of Israel carried their captives. Okay, so again, it talks again about the same thing, same issue. Again, historically, we've got a historical background here. We're talking about real events, historical events, and what the historical background is that these kings are trying to overthrow the house of David. Now, I want to emphasize again one point here, which is very important. Let's look back again at verse 6, where it says in Isaiah 7:6, let us go up against Judah and vex it, and let us make a breach therein for us and set up a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tibal. Now, what's it talking about here? He wants to set up another kingdom, but what really is the implications of that? Okay, and this is very important to understand. When it's talking here, what exactly are the implications of having this happen? So we have to look at the second book of Kings, chapter 10. Now, to give a little background here, Achav was a king in Israel. He was a wicked king. And God decreed that one of his generals, Yehu, should depose him and take over kingdom. Very similar to the story we're talking about in here in Isaiah. Tabal would be the one who would take over, down throw of the house of David, and he would be taken down. So here, Yehu would take over in place of Ahaz in his kingdom. So let's see how they deal with such a situation. And I want you to remember something. We're talking thousands of years before the Geneva Convention, okay? No such things as non-combatants, not everything like that, okay? When it came to war, no holds barred, okay? You have to understand that this is the way it was at that time. There was no Geneva Convention, okay? So nobody followed it. So we're dealing here now in chapter 10. Let's go to verse 6. This is talking about Yehu, who sends a letter. Then he wrote a letter the second time to them, saying, if ye be on my side, and if ye will hearken unto my voice, take ye the heads of the men of your master's sons, and come to me in your zeal by tomorrow this time. Now the king's sons, that's who he's talking about, these king's sons being Ahaz's sons, being 70 persons were with the great men of the city who brought them up. And it came to pass when the letter came to them, that they took the king's sons and slew them, even 70 persons, and put the heads in baskets, and sent them unto him to Israel. Then verse 8 says, and then they came to mention Talmud, they have talks about that. Verse 12, Yehu goes and departs, and he rose and departed and went to Samaria. And as he was at the shearing house of the shepherds in the way, Yehu met with the brethren of Ahaziah, king of Judah. Ahaziah, king of Judah, was a son-in-law of Ahaz, and said, who are ye? And they answered, we are the brethren of Ahaziah, and we go down to salute the children of the king and the children of the queen. Now that meant that he was a relative, only a relative by marriage of Ahaz. So he's considered still part of Ahaz. And what does Yehu say? And he said, take them alive. And they took them alive and slew them at the pit of the shearing house, even 42 men, neither left he any of them. Verse 17 continues on pretty much. I don't want to go too much because I won't spend the time. But in verse 17, and when he came into Samaria, he smote all the remainder of Achav in Samaria till he had destroyed him, according to the words of the Lord, which he spoke to Elijah. What's going on here? When a king is placed in the place of another king, he wipes out the total family, the total royal family. Even sons-in-laws are wiped out and killed. Okay? This is the introduction and the point that we should take from the introduction to what we're going to read from verse 10 on. Okay? That what Ahaz was aware of was that he was going to be murdered. His whole family, the whole house of David, would be wiped out completely. We're not just talking about deposing a king and sending a different person in his place, and the rest of the family go, they take their money and they go to, Bermuda, and live their life's house in peace somewhere else. No, the whole family gets wiped out to the last person. Okay? That is a danger that is now presented to Ahaz by Isaiah. That's the background. You have to understand what's going on here. We're talking about total destruction of the house of David. An end to the promise that Hashem made to David and Solomon, that their kingdom, their family would exist. A total wiping out of that. That's what's being talked about here. Okay? So when we get it, that's your context for what's going on. So now let's go on. And we have to understand, who is the child we're talking about here? Okay? Before we get to a discussion, we have to understand, well, who is the child at this sign? So we see in verse 15, it gives a little bit of description about that child and that life of the child. It says, curd and honey shall he eat, when he knows to refuse the evil and choose the good. Yea, before the child shall know to refuse evil and choose the good, the land of these two kings thou hast horror of shall be forsaken. So this child that we're talking about is a child that's going to be born that by the time it eats curds and honey. Now, interesting enough, if you look at verse 22, it tells us when these two kings fall down that actually curd and honey is going to be so plentiful that everybody's going to have it. Okay? Apparently, curd and honey was something that only rich people had, but after the fall of these two, everybody's going to have it. Okay? So this child who's being described is going to live at a time when these two kings are going to be wiped out. So what is this time? I want to go into chapter 8. Chapter 8, we see the verse about the birth of Isaiah's son. Okay? And in verse 4, what does it say? Before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father, my mother, the riches of the master and the spoils of Samaria shall be carried away before the king of Assyria. What do we see? Isaiah's son and the child that's being talked about in Isaiah 7 live in the same time. They're contemporaries. So we see here a clear indication of what the period of time is when this child lives. Now, it has to be admitted, some people think that the child that's discussed about here is the son of the king. Some think it's actually Isaiah's child that's mentioned again in 8. And it could possibly be any, because the verse doesn't say which child it is. It just says which the woman is and indicates which woman it is. We're going to get to that in 1 second. But what we do see quite clearly is that the child in 7 and the child, Isaiah's child in 8, if they're not the same child, they're contemporaries. They live at the same time. The child in 7 is going to be a certain age when the two kings disappear. Isaiah's son appears to be a similar type of age in chapter 8. Okay, so we see that, number 1, we see what Ahaz's problem is. Number 2, we see that the child that's being talked about is living in that time. So we see what's going on is, before we even read what's there, we see that what's being told is Ahaz is going to be given words to tell him that his problems are going to be over. And this child is related to what the answer is, but his problems are going to be over.
That's what I was going to say, is that the urgency or the plight that King Ahaz is found, it would make no sense if the prophecy or what's being referred to here had something to do with a child 100 generations later. Like,
Absolutely,
how is that going to help him?
absolutely, that's what it is. But unless you have to be really sensitive to how real serious this problem is. I mean, it's not just Ahaz who's shivering in his boots. All of his royal people around him, they're all afraid because they know if they lose, it's off with their heads. That's it, the end of it. Okay? Because that's what happens. We saw, remember when I read the passage in 2 Kings, that's what it means. Okay? It doesn't mean that he's going to be deposed and, he'll live on a pension somewhere. Okay? It's not they're going to go away somewhere and they can, go to a friendly kingdom, something like that, which happens when, dictators today, they negotiate to give up their control. They take the money and they run somewhere. That's not what happens then. It's off with their heads and that's it. They're all gone. Okay? So when we look at this, you have to remember what really is his problem. And the truth of the matter is, as a king, he's a pretty wicked guy. You got to admit. Okay? So let's now start in verse 10 and read exactly what the prophecy says. I'm going to read it again from the JPS. And we'll then look at what it says in the KJV, which you will see where they do, again, a little bit of creative translations, and we'll deal with it. So in verse 10, and the Lord spoke unto Ahaz, saying, ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God, ask it either in the depth or in the height above. Okay? So God says to him, listen, okay, you know what's the story. I'm telling you it's not going to be. You're not a very big believer, okay? Mm-hmm. You're not such a righteous guy, okay? You're a skeptic, okay? You're not, okay? So I'm telling you, ask a sign. So Ahaz, of course, acts like he's really religious, but Ahaz says, I will not ask, neither will I try the Lord. Mm-hmm. So then what does God do? He said, hear ye now, O house of David. So he's speaking to everybody there. All of them are all the same. They're all in the same boat, by the way. Mm-hmm. Although the primary person who he's talking is Ahaz, but really he's speaking to everybody in the house of David because they're all in the same boat. Mm-hmm. Okay? Whatever happens to Ahaz is going to happen to anybody who is descendant of King David. Anyone who has a right to the throne from Davidic descent, he's going to go just like Yahoo did to the descendants of Ahaz. All of them are gone. They're going to kill all of them. That's the way it works. Okay. It's let's be blunt. It's not a very pleasant period of time to live in when then there's wars. There were no Geneva Conventions, none of the niceties what we have developed afterwards. Okay, those things didn't exist. Okay, that's the real world. That's the real world. This is history. This is really what it was like. Okay, that's what it is. You went in a city and you wiped out everybody. You killed all the men. You took the women. Okay, that's what happened. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Thucydides. Thucydides, the history of Peloponnesian Wars, brings the island of Melos, where the Athenians wiped out all the men, killed all the males, and took the women into slavery. That's the way it was. Okay, no Geneva Convention existed. I mean, it's a little objectionable now, but that's really what life was like then. Okay, so when you read it in the Tanakh, the way it is, that's the unvarnished history of exactly what it was like. Okay, no Geneva Convention until Geneva, which didn't exist at the time. Before that, all bets, there were no rules of war. The strong did what they wanted. Okay, So here, God continues. Okay, Ahaz says he doesn't want to try him. So he said, okay, here, O house of David, because everybody's in the same boat here. Is it a small thing for you to weary men, that you weary my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, the young woman shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Immanuel. Okay, Immanuel basically means God is with us, just like Isaiah again. Remember, Isaiah had a son, Shal-Yishiv, saying that a remnant will remain. Immanuel means that God is with us. Okay, they didn't think that God was with them. As we see in the book of Chronicles, we see that already the kingdom of Israel and Aram had already conquered part of the kingdom of Judah and slaughtered many people. They didn't have so much faith, but God was saying, 1 second, no, God is with you. I'm going to show you that God's with you because these guys are going to disappear and they're going to get wiped out from Assyria. Okay, these guys think they're the big guys on the block, but that's it. It's over with. Okay, so that's what it's talking. The sign is, what's the sign going to be? This child. As you watch the child grow, some people, when the children grow, they like make marks on the wall, the size of the kid. When the child gets to a certain, they make another mark. They make a sign on the wall. My child at this age was this size. At this age and do it. I don't know if you do it or whatever. I don't know if you have children with it, but there's some that do that to mark as a sign of the age. God is giving the sign. What's the sign? When this child reaches a certain place, that's when it's going to happen by. So what's the sign? Curd and honey shall he eat when he knoweth to refuse evil and choose good. Yea, before the child shall know to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings thou hast horror of shall be forsaken. What's that mean? Let's say you have on a wall that a child gets to be a certain age. That's when they know good and evil. Okay? Before that child grows to that size, that's your sign. Before he gets to that time, they're going to be gone. Before that time, they're going to be signed. Okay? Continues, the Lord shall bring upon thee and upon thy people and upon thy father's house days that have not come, and they that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Syria. So he's going to bring Assyria onto them, and bad things are going to happen. Okay? And he continues what happens there. And the rest of the chapter is basically talking about the kinds of things that are going to happen, the destructions that are going to happen to those kingdoms. Again, verse 22 is an important one to remember, that says that once these have been destroyed, there's going to be such a plenty that everybody's going to have curd and honey. Okay. Now, as you know, which we will read it again, in the KJV, they translate it differently. Okay. Here's 7:14 there. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and call his name Immanuel. Okay. So the question, of course, is, what does the word actually mean? Now, in the Hebrew, the text reads like this. Let me get back to it here. The text reads like that. Verse 14, here it is. L'chain yitain Adonai hi lechem. Therefore, the Lord will give to you. Ois, a sign. Hinehu Alma, the Alma. We're going to discuss that means really a young woman. Hora is pregnant, yolated, and she will give birth then to a son. Alma is here. Now, what has to be understood, first of all, in Hebrew grammar, there's no word the in Hebrew. Okay? So the difference between a house and the house, where the direct object talking the house as opposed to a house, in Hebrew there's no word for a and the. There's just the noun itself, and if you want to say the something, you put a hey in front of it, and in grammatical hey, you do the known hey because it signifies a specific one. So when Isaiah is talking there, he says Alma, he's talking about this young woman. Okay. Again, we saw the KJV translated as virgin. We're going to discuss about that, how that's not true. But you have to understand that what part of an understanding is that it's speaking about a specific woman. Okay, one that they would know. We don't necessarily know it, of course, because we're not there. Okay, could be Isaiah's wife. It could be the king's wife. It could be another woman who's there. Okay, Jewish commentaries go between it being the child being Hezekiah or being Isaiah's son. But just to put out it there, both of them seem to me logical. But there's, it could be somebody else who we don't know. But the text is quite clear that those people standing there, everybody in the house of David, all the royal family that's there, they know who we're talking about. We don't necessarily need to know because we don't need to know. At the end of Job, God tells Job, you don't need to know everything. Okay, that's basically what he tells him. Not everything we need to know. We just need to know what's important for us to know. Okay, now the question is, what does it mean? Does it mean virgin, or does it mean a young woman? So I think I want to read to you. There's a book out there from Dr. Michael Brown. It's called Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus. Okay, and I'm going to read. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to read the text exactly as he has it. Okay? So, talking about Isaiah 7:14, he says, this leads to a question that has received almost endless discussion for close to 20 centuries. Does the word Alma mean virgin? My answer, as a committed believer in Yeshua the Messiah, may surprise you. While the word Alma can refer to a virgin, it does not specifically mean virgin. Its basic meaning is primarily related to adolescence, not sexual chastity. The evidence is actually fairly clear. There is a masculine equivalent to Alma, namely Elam. Same words, except Alma has the hey at the end, which makes it feminine, but Elam does not have. Occurring twice in the Hebrew Bible, it doesn't occur very much. I should also point out the word Alma also doesn't appear very much. So it's a rare word. Makes it very interesting because it's a rare word to wonder where it came from. It may be archaic or maybe something else, but whatever. Dr. Brown happens to be much more of a linguist like that. I'm not as much of a linguist, although I know the language well. Okay, but it does appear rarely. So again, I'll read again. Number one, there is a masculine equivalent to Alma, namely Elam, occurring twice in the Hebrew scriptures. The first one is 1 Samuel 17:56, and the other one is 20:22, and also 1 Samuel. It simply means youth, a young man, with no reference to virginity at all. Just substitute male virgin in either of these two passages, and the absurdity of such a translation will be seen at once. So he gives the example of 1 Samuel 17:56, where Saul wants to learn more about David after he killed Goliath. The story there is that David kills Goliath, and King Saul wants to know who this guy was. Did David say, find out whose son this male virgin is? It doesn't make sense. It's a joke. He simply said, find out whose son this young man is, because Elam meant young man, not male virgin. Very important. What he's saying here is absolutely 100% right on. Okay, so that's his first reason. Okay, number two, let me get it. The words Elam and Alma should be derived from a Semitic root meaning to come into puberty, to come into heat for an animal. Okay, he's talking here as a scholar in linguist, which he is a scholar of that, by the way. I am not familiar with this, but I will take his word on it. Not from the Semitic root meaning to hide, be hidden, with the supposed reference to virginity. What he's mentioning here, by the way, is a number of these supposed Christian scholars say Alma means virgin because it comes from Elam. Elam means to be hidden. And he says, no, that's not what it comes from. Okay? It means from words meaning to be, for puberty. Okay? Again, I have to rely on him on this thing because I happen to know he is a scholar of the ancient Middle East languages. Okay? So he's talking about something he certainly does. Number three, in the other Semitic languages, Alma does not specifically mean virgin. That may be true, but that is actually true. Four, within the Tanakh, Alma does not in and of itself clearly and unambiguously mean virgin. Outside of Isaiah 7:14, Alma appears 6 times in the Old Testament, and in 4 of these cases, the NIV, a conservative Christian translation, does not render the word as virgin. Why? Because that is not the primary meaning of the word. Number 5, the related noun alumim, occurring in Isaiah 54:4 and Psalm 89:45, is correctly translated as youth and not virginity in the KJV itself. Interesting. And the NKJV and the SB and the NIV, all of which translate Alma in Isaiah 7:14 as virgin. So again, we see here an example of creative translation in order to fulfill your theological bias. Okay, and let me just continue. We said, again, youthfulness, not sexual chastity, is the basic meaning of the word. 6, in Aramaic, this I do know, Alma, or actually in Aramaic, it's Almata, sometimes referred to a woman who has been sexually active. Almata in Aramaic means, Alma in Aramaic means a young woman. Okay? It does not mean virgin. The word in Aramaic usually used for virgin, and if you're Jewish, you see this because every marriage contract that we write for a woman who gets married, who's, the women are virgins when they get married, use the word basilta, which is the Aramaic for batula in Hebrew. Okay? They're very cognitive. Aramaic and Hebrew are very, very close to each other. As far as I can tell, the Aramaic and Hebrew are the closest languages to each other among the Semitic languages. There's similarities, for example, if I hear Arabic, there's some words in Arabic I make up because it's Semitic languages, but Aramaic is much, much closer. So he ends this. To put it simply, There are women who are 50 years old and have never been with a man, making them 50-year-old virgins. And this is perfectly acceptable English usage, since virginity has to do with sexual chastity, not age. But it would be incorrect to speak of a 50-year-old Alma in biblical Hebrew usage, since the root Ilam has more to do with age and sexual development, adolescence, than with sexual chastity. Now, in his footnote 44, he mentions something that's very important. It is often argued that in the culture of the time, a woman who was indeed an Alma, in particular one who was subject of the prophecy concerning the significant child she was to bear, was presumed to be a virgin, since it is argued there is no record of a married Alma in the Bible. There are, however, several problems with this argument, including, one, if the goal of the prophecy was clearly and ambiguously declared that there would be a virgin birth, a qualifying statement would need to be made. And he says comments about it. Number two, the cognate evidence and other Semitic lines does not support this premise. Number three, many scholars believe that Proverbs 30:19 speaks of an Alma having sexual intercourse. Okay, so he brings a number of reasons as to why Alma there definitely does not necessarily mean a virgin. There are more that I brought up and mentioned to other people. First of all, you have to understand something. The society was much different then. Okay, people married much earlier. Until about 200 years ago, people married at puberty. The reason is because you wanted to have more children. Many children died in childbirth. Many women died in childbirth. My grandmother, for example, died in childbirth. Okay, it was very common. So women and men married young because there was less chance of children reaching adulthood. So children marrying at the age of 12, for example, or 11, 12, 13, that age, would not be unusual. And everybody understands that a girl who was 11 or 12, 13 would be called an Alma, even if she had been married. Even if she had already a child, she would still be an Alma. So it's important to understand that in Isaiah's time, women were getting married at 11, 12 years old, as soon as they approached puberty. I actually saw the Game of Thrones. I tried to keep up with some of modern culture. Remember, there's a whole thing about when she flowered, that she can marry the king. That's because when you have puberty, you are able to get married, always, because children didn't live until. So when that happened, puberty, and that would be, I mean, in the show, she's obviously not 11 or 12 years old. She's much older, but in fact, in real life, she would have been 11 or 12 years old. So, even the Alma, if you understand the Alma as being a young woman, you cannot say in any way whatsoever that she has not already been married and he has not already had sexual relations. Because at that time, now we don't. I mean, our girls' daughters at 11, 12 years old, they're not mature enough to get married under any way whatsoever. I mean, we mature much, much later. There's people 30 years old, they're not mature. But, 250 years, life was much different. You matured much quicker and much younger. So life was different.
Yeah.
So,
and if she was unmarried, wouldn't that raise issues regarding the legitimacy of her pregnancy or something else?
Well, no. She what happens after the first night? She's no longer a virgin, isn't she?
Mm-hmm.
She became pregnant. She becomes pregnant normally. So after the first night, she's no longer a virgin.
Right.
I mean, that is what I'm not going to teach you about the facts of life, but that's what happens, right? I mean, that's what happens. After the first night, she's no longer a virgin. So yeah, she may still be a virgin, but after the first night, she's no longer a virgin. That's just the way it is.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So, all of these discussions are trying to draw a circle around your arrows. That's basically what it is. Okay. But if you think about it, just use your mind a second and remember what period of time you're talking about. Real life. There's no way you can make that word into meaning what it is.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're going to talk about how to best translate the hara.
Hara means that she is pregnant. Most of them are translated in the present tense that she is pregnant.
Right. So that's
that again is another issue. But the truth of the matter is like this: you might argue this sometimes, maybe, but because we know the child is living the same time as Isaiah's child, we've already pegged the child as when the mother was, became pregnant 9 months before the child was born.
Because it seems to me oxymoronic to both affirm that she's a virgin and that she's pregnant.
Yeah. Okay. Again, but you only get to that because we're talking about something in that period of time. Once we know it's in that period of time, whether hara means that she's going to become pregnant or she is pregnant is not really relevant. And I want to concentrate on the real, let's hone on the things that really are without getting sidetracked on some things, because there are many important points that are here. Okay. Now, so what is the Hebrew word that would mean for, okay, so we have Alma here. I want to bring up one other thing, because sometimes before I go to the next issue about the Hebrew word for virgin, which is Betula, or Basula is the way I would say it, there's the word Parthenos. The New Testament was written in Greek. The word in Greek there is Parthenos. So it's claimed that Isaiah uses also the word in the Greek translation. Excuse me. In the Greek translation, uses the word Parthenos. So maybe it means virgin because that's what it meant then. The problem is that if you look at Genesis 34, verse 3. Now, let's look at it in the KJV because the KJV is even better, okay? Verse 3, okay? In the Greek, the word Parthenos appears there. Now, in chapter 34, it's talking about the daughter of Dinah, who was captured by Shechem and becomes raped. And it says in verse 1 that he lay with her, means he had sexual relations with her. In verse 2, excuse me. And in verse 3, and his soul clave, I'm reading the KJV this right now, so you should understand. And his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the damsel and spoke kindly unto the damsel. There, words damsel, basically another name for young girl, young woman. Okay? It does not use virgin because the word is Parthenos. And it's really not relevant to call Dinah Parthenos after she's been raped.
Right.
Again, these are just, you have to use common sense, facts of life. That's just the way it is. Now, I have heard Dr. Ehrman says and others that actually, like many words change meaning. So at one time, Parthenos meant a young woman and could have meant a virgin also. But by the time of the writing of Matthew, it just stayed meaning virgin. Okay. Words do change. That's very common. For example, just take the word gay. Okay. If you said somebody was gay 200 years ago, it means he was a person who was very happy. Okay. Gay today means he's a homosexual, right? So words change in times. Words change. Okay. So the word Parthenos is just like that. It just changed over time.
And I do want to say that there are examples in the classical Greek literature where that is the case, where you do see a usage of Parthenos without the sexual, the virginity aspect to it.
But again, it's something that's it's not uncommon for words to change meaning over time. Okay. So, the translation of the portion of Genesis and Isaiah, I don't know how much far apart from it, but the word Parthenos, they just meant it as a young woman. And later on, the next issue we have to, so what is the word for Betula? So I'm going to read Dr. Brown again, because here I'm going to disagree with him actually. But I want to read it because this is an answer you're going to get many times. Okay? Because the question is, if we want to say virgin, we should have used the word Betula. So Dr. Brown is going to say, well, that's not going to work very much. And I'm going to show you why it actually does work. Even in verses where the translation of virgin is appropriate for Betula, talks about that, a qualifying phrase is sometimes added, as in Genesis 24:16. The maiden was very beautiful, a virgin, whom no man had known. Now, he's not denying that. Obviously, if Betula clearly not equivalent meant virgin here, there will be no need to explain this kind, that this Betula and never had intercourse with a man. That's not actually true. Just think of normal English usage. We would never say a young woman that was a virgin, she never had sexual intercourse in her life. Okay, virginity today, however, is not the same as then. Okay, virginity meant something very specific. Okay, we'll get into a certain text in the book of Deuteronomy about that. But virginity was very important. A girl who was not a virgin at marriage was looked down upon. So virginity meant something very, very, very much. Okay, now if a woman had sexual relations, what we call unnatural sexual relations, for example, that wouldn't affect her virginity. Okay, so that's why, for example, one of the reasons why the text is given, for one of the reasons why the text mentions that, because she was living in a particular country where sexual morality was common, but girls before marriage were very careful to maintain their virginity until at least they got married. They were not so careful about other things, but they were that. I'm not going to be more graphic because I know children will be listening to this, but you understand what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, so here Dr. Brown says that, however, that does not fit very well. And the reason is very simple. Let's look at a biblical text, because remember, the Torah in a biblical text is going to talk in chapter 22 of the book of Deuteronomy. It talks about marriage. And again, marriage to a woman who was not a virgin, who was claimed to be a virgin, is going to be a problem. So I'm going to read from the Hebrew, the JPS first, and then we'll go to the KJV, which has some reading. So it says in verse 13.
Deuteronomy 22.
Verse 13, yes. These deal with we're getting into there on the laws of marriage. Remember, if a man, when marriage basically always was considered some kind of almost like a contractual thing. Okay, I'm marrying a woman; she's a virgin. The father's telling me this, my daughter's a virgin, and there was a dowry we would give to the father and stuff like that. This was ancient customs. They're not really relevant even today. Even the Jewish community, they're not really relevant today. But okay, so if a girl was a virgin, she'd never been married before, didn't have sexual relations before, she was, considered chaste and everything like that. And that's a very valuable thing. You want a wife that's not running around all the time. So what happens? Chapter 22, verse 13, it says, if any man take a wife and go on to her, and yes, relations with her, and hate her, and he hates her, and lay wanton charges against her, meaning he claims and bring an evil name upon her, and say, I took this woman, and when I came nigh to her, I found not in her the tokens of virginity. Mm-hmm. Okay? He found out she wasn't a virgin. What it means is that the normal thing is that when a woman is a virgin, when she has her first relations, that she will bleed. Now, what does it say in the KJV? Let's see if I can find it here. Okay. The KJV, it says the same thing. Then shall the father of the damsel, in KJV, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found her not a maid. Okay. Now, again, let's go back to what it continues in, here, in the JPS. Then the father of the damsel and her mother will take and bring forth the tokens of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the gate. Okay. Now, the words that, let's go back to KJV again. So what's it say after that? And the damsel's father shall say unto the elders, I gave my daughter unto this woman, and he hated her. Okay. That was unto the elders. Okay. And 15, and then to the father of the damsel and her mother to bring forth tokens of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the city of the gate. Okay. So he says the tokens of virginity. What is the word in Hebrew for tokens of virginity? It is besulim or betulim. Okay? Signs of virginity is betulim. The noun form of the signs of virginity is from the word betula, betulim. Okay? That's why when it says a virgin here, when you need to have the actual legal sense of the word, it uses the word betula. Now, he brings other sources where we can get into all kinds of arguments of the grammar of that, and I can go on for this. We can go discuss this for 1 or 2 hours. But we have to consider when the Tanakh, when the Bible talks about legally, who is a woman who has not had a child, it says she's a betula. She doesn't add any other words to that. Saying betula alone is sufficient to know that she's never had any sexual relations.
Right.
And it comes with betulim. The Hebrew itself tells it comes with betulim, which is a sign of her virginity.
So do you think Michael Brown he's just ignoring this passage, or?
If Brown knows this, so what's his answer? How does he deal with something in Matthew? Okay, so his justification for Matthew is very interesting, and I really wanted to read it to you. Again, it's a little bit farther. I think it's page 24 in his book. What I read before is, I think, 2021. In 24, this is what he says. All this points to the fact that the birth of a great importance was being announced to the prophet. So it's a birth of great importance, especially for David's house. It was God's answer to the attack on the Davidic dynasty, and it was meant as a demonstration of his power and reality. as Matthew looked back at this prophecy in context, this is what he saw. Now, this is Dr. Brown's rationalization. The birth of Immanuel is highly significant in Isaiah 7:8. There are two major messianic prophecies found in Isaiah 9 and 11. Now, what he's doing here, very importantly, is he's cutting off 9 from 7, 8, and 10. Okay? He's removing 10 and making 9 like a part of 11. Okay? Now, when we talk about Isaiah 9, where I'm going to show you that actually Isaiah 9 is associated with 7, 8, 9, and 10, and not with 11, which is the start of a new subject, we'll see why this is a problem. For the moment, just look at it. What he's doing is a little fancy footwork. Okay? Very good. Dr. Brown is very intelligent and does this very well. Yeshua's birth truly was a supernatural sign. Part of the sign that was being Alma was in fact a virgin that she gave birth to a son. But Yeshua was Immanuel. That's very fine. Okay? Remember we talked about eisegesis. Mm-hmm. Okay? We talked about eisegesis. Okay? Where someone gives an interpretation and says it means something, but that's not what the text said. The text we've clearly shown and is talking about what the problem of Achas is, what's happening exactly at that time. That's what the whole child is. Okay? Brown is building up something based on what the New Testament says, not what it says. And if Matthew happened because he believed the stuff in the New Testament, built it up himself, that doesn't change what God's word was.
It's clearly not about some miracle child.
That child clearly is a contemporary of Isaiah's child in chapter 8. There's no way of getting around that.
Serve, and it's clearly meant to serve as a sign,
right?
For Ahaz, not that the child is going to do anything. And the sign, and I think that's where the name comes in to play, is that because most Christians will read the translation of Immanuel as like God with us, like God incarnated and now is among us, but it's more like God is on our side of this.
Well, that means God's. I mean, let's put it this way. I don't know if you know, but I have friends named Immanuel. We don't think that we're saying that this guy's God incarnate. We're saying that name, like many Jewish names have God's name in it. My second name, Ezekiel, has God's name in it. It means God strengthens. Okay, doesn't mean that I'm God. We don't give names because names are names. But the point is, Immanuel just means the child is telling us that God is with us. The whole thing that's going on until now is Achaz doesn't believe that God is with him anymore.
Right.
In fact, he acts that way. He sends money to Assyria because he ignores the fact that God's with him. But Isaiah tells him, no, God is with you. Even though you don't believe it, God is still with you. That's what the name means. It signifies. Now,
and it's not that God is not with us like he's among us, but that he's not on our side like collectively.
Correct.
As a nation.
God's with us. God is still with the Jewish people. And again, remember we looked at some of these prophecies in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, very clear, 23, 33, and Ezekiel 34. God is very clear there. God is still with the Jewish people, even in exile, even when they've sinned him. God is still with them. And quite frankly, if you need to know any other proof that God's with the Jewish people, you're looking at somebody who should not be alive. If you know anything about Jewish history, in the lands of the Jewish people and all the suffering and everything went on, that there should be a Jewish person here talking to you today is just miraculous. If you just know anything about history, okay? That is because God is still with the Jewish people until today. I want to mention one more thing. I mentioned about Brown's justification for Matthew. There's another justification for Matthew I heard. I haven't heard it recently, but I have heard it one. And that says that actually in the verse, Isaiah is speaking to two things. He's speaking to the house of David separate and to the king separate, as if they have different worries. But as we saw, in fact, that's not true. In 1 through 9, Isaiah 1 through 9, where we see what's going on, Adam and Israel are trying to replace the whole house of Israel. Right. It's not just the king who has a problem. It's everybody has a problem. So whether the prophet's speaking to the whole house or Achaz at that time, it refers to everybody. All of them are in the same boat. Okay? And I think that pretty much covers every issue regarding this. So let's just review very quickly what we're talking about. Isaiah 7:14, the context is very clear. We see from verse 1 to 9, and then if you look at the book of Kings, and especially in the book of Chronicles, which goes a little bit more about what's going on, we see that the king and the house of David are in very, very serious danger of being destroyed, overthrown, and totally obliterated. Okay, as we saw in the second book of Kings with the house of Achav, that when new dynasty takes over, the old dynasty, all of the people were wiped out. That's the context for what Isaiah is going to speak about. And when we look into it, the description of the history of the child, and we compare it to Isaiah's child in the next verse, that the child will reach a certain age, and then these two kingdoms, Aram and Israel, will be destroyed, will no longer be a problem to Judah. And we see Isaiah, the same thing. Aram and Israel will no longer be a problem when his child gets it. We see these two children are contemporaries. So the child that this person is going to give birth to is a child born at that time, and is a proper sign to the house of David and everybody there to know that when this child reaches a certain age, all these people are going to disappear. And then, of course, we can go back to the prophecy now and see that the prophet is talking about a child will be born to a woman. As Dr. Brown is quite clear about that, is not specifying a virgin. It specifies the word that means a woman. As I pointed out from Deuteronomy, if it had wanted to be specific that the woman was a virgin, it would have mentioned somehow the word Betula there, and it does not. And that's essentially what the issue is here. The word Immanuel, we're going to be discussing more about naming conventions in the Tanakh. But as I said here, Immanuel just means God's with us. They had lost faith in God. And the whole purpose of this prophecy is to say, no, God has not forgotten you. You're going to have a child. This child's going to be a sign when it gets up, because that's going to be a sign to you that God is still with the Jewish people at that time. That in a nutshell. And that's all.
Perfect. Excellent. So I'm so looking forward to where are we going off next? Should we?
The next one will be Isaiah 9. They want to go, I think Hosea 11:1 is the one next on the list. Isaiah 9 is going to be pretty long, just like Isaiah 7 was a long one, because there's a lot of information you have to fully understand what this prophecy is about. So Isaiah 9 is also a little bit more. Although our introduction here about the situation was going politically is very good of a help it'll cut down a lot of information you need to know for Isaiah 9, because Isaiah 9 is building on that. 7, 8, 9, and 10 are all part of a consistent prophecy talking about the events of Aram, Israel, and Assyria, and Judah.
Excellent.
Obviously. Okay. And then there's a few, I think 11:1. I don't have my list in front of me at the moment. I know Hosea 11:1 is going to come in there after that. That's going to be shorter. We'll probably be able to get through many more in the next session.
Awesome. So there you have it, folks. Right here, Rabbi Moshe Shulman is providing us with his critical commentary on these so-called Messianic prophecies, these so-called fulfillments through Jesus. And we're giving you the right context. We're giving you the right translation. We're giving deep dive into the language and how it's really working and how it doesn't really work. And so, folks, if this is the kind of thing that you're interested in learning more, and you've just now stepped on into this video today, please go back and watch the first installment. And then also be sure to click on the links that I will be providing in the description below, where you can have access to more of Rabbi Moshe Shulman's works and his website, his YouTube channel, etc. So we're glad that you've made it through the end. And we really appreciate you, Rabbi, for putting in your time and giving us your expertise on this. It's been really awesome.
I'd like to thank you. Also, I'd like to remind you that everybody watching this should subscribe both to Mark's channel and my channel. If you're seeing it through my channel, then go over to Mark's. I'm going to put in a comment how to get to him and subscribe to him and support him in, this, if you like this kind of stuff. And if you're on Mark's, just go to mine and subscribe to mine also, so you can see other things that I be doing. And if you subscribe to him, you see other things he's doing. Your support is always very much appreciated.
Yes.
It encourages us to do more of this kind of work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much. And folks, this has been an episode of Apostate of Mind.